Have you ever opened a file that made your heart stop before you even read the first page? I have, and the strangest part wasn't what was written inside. It was the name printed across the front. Mine. My name is Emma Carter, and for the last 8 years, I've worked as an investigative journalist in Boston. People think journalism is exciting because of the headlines. They're wrong. Most days are boring. You read reports, you interview strangers, you spend hours searching for one tiny detail everyone else ignored. But every once in a while, a story finds you instead. And when that happens, your life is never the same again. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when my editor called me into his office. "Emma," he said, sliding a thick folder across his desk, "how do you feel about reopening a 20-year-old missing person case?" I looked down at the faded file. Across the cover, someone had written in red ink, "Case closed." "Why now?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "Because someone mailed us an anonymous package yesterday." He placed a small brown envelope beside the file. "No return address. No fingerprints. Just one sentence." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single photograph. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were 6 words. She was never really missing. A chill ran down my spine. "Who's the woman?" My editor looked at the file. Her name was Olivia Brooks. She disappeared 20 years ago. Police searched for months. Then they closed the case. No body. No suspect. No answers. I stared at Olivia's smiling face in the photograph. She couldn't have been older than 28. She looked normal, like someone you'd pass at a grocery store without a second thought. Nothing about her suggested she would suddenly disappear. "So, why send this now?" My editor shrugged. "That's your job to figure out." By noon, I was standing outside the Boston Police Records Archive. The building looked forgotten. Dust covered the windows. Old boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling. A gray-haired archivist checked my press ID before disappearing into the back room. When he returned, he placed 3 heavy evidence boxes on the table. "Nobody has requested these in almost 15 years, he said. "Good luck?" He walked away. I opened the first box. Newspaper clippings, interview transcripts, maps, family photographs. Nothing unusual. The second box contained police reports, witness statements, phone records. Again, nothing that explained the anonymous photograph. Then I opened the third box. At first, it looked almost empty. Only a small white envelope rested in one corner. No label, no date. I carefully opened it. Inside was an old hospital identification bracelet. The plastic had turned slightly yellow with age. I held it under the light. Printed across the faded band were 3 things: a hospital name, a birth date, and one first name. Emma. I stopped breathing. No, that had to be impossible. I looked again. The bracelet read, "Emma, June 18th, St. Anne's Medical Center, my birthday, my hospital, my name." I quickly pulled my wallet from my pocket and removed my driver's license. Same birth date, same hospital, same first name. My hands started shaking. Maybe it was coincidence. There had to be thousands of girls named Emma, right? I reached deeper into the envelope. There was one more item, a tiny photograph, a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. On the back, someone had written, "Never stop looking for her." I couldn't move. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Why would evidence from a missing woman's case contain a baby bracelet with my name? None of it made sense. I grabbed the case file and searched every page for one detail. Then, halfway through an old interview transcript, I found it. Detective's note. Victim gave birth to a baby girl 2 days before her disappearance. I read the sentence again. And again. The baby girl's name had been removed with black marker. Someone had intentionally covered it. My pulse raced. Who erased the name, and why? At that exact moment, my phone rang. It was my mother. For some reason, I stared at her name on the screen without answering. A strange feeling settled over me. For the first time in my life. I wasn't sure I knew who I really was. I didn't answer my mother's call. I just stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. A minute later, she texted me. "Emma, your father and I were wondering if you're coming for dinner tonight?" Normally, I would have replied right away, but after what I had just found, I couldn't. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to the evidence box. There had to be another explanation. Maybe the bracelet had been placed in the wrong file. Maybe someone had made a mistake years ago. I wanted to believe that, but every page I turned made that hope weaker. Near the bottom of the box was a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a silver heart-shaped pendant. When I flipped it over, I noticed tiny engraved letters. "For my little girl. Love, Mom." The police report beside it read, "Recovered from Olivia Brooks' apartment after her disappearance, believed to have been intended for her newborn daughter." A newborn daughter. Again. I leaned back in my chair. Something wasn't right. Why had someone hidden the baby's name? Why was my hospital bracelet inside this file? And why had nobody questioned it? The next morning, I drove to St. Anne's Medical Center, the hospital listed on the bracelet. The building had been renovated several times over the past 20 years, but part of the old records department still remained. A woman at the front desk politely smiled. "Can I help you?" "I'm an investigative journalist," I said, showing my press ID. "I'm researching a case from 20 years ago." She hesitated. "Most records from that time are archived." "I know. I'm looking for birth records from June 18th. She frowned. "I'm sorry, but I can't release private medical records." "I understand. I'm only trying to confirm whether certain files still exist." She thought for a moment before calling someone from the archive department. A few minutes later, an elderly records supervisor arrived. His name tag read Harold Benson. When I explained why I was there, his expression changed. "You said June 18th? "Yes." He looked strangely uncomfortable. "I remember that week." "You do?" He nodded slowly. "There was an incident." "What kind of incident?" He glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. "Several paper records disappeared." I felt my heart race. Disappeared? Someone broke into the records room late one night. Some files were recovered. Some were never found. Were any newborn records affected? He looked directly into my eyes. Yes. That single word echoed in my mind. Was anyone arrested? Harold shook his head. No. The investigation ended without answers. Do you remember the names involved? He hesitated. Only one. Olivia Brooks. My stomach tightened. The same woman from the missing persons case? Yes. He lowered his voice. She came here every day after giving birth. She kept telling everyone that her baby wasn't the one she had held after delivery. I froze. What? Doctors believed she was confused after childbirth. But she never stopped insisting. She said someone had switched her baby. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Baby switched? Was that even possible? Harold sighed. Most people dismissed her. Then, she disappeared. I left the hospital feeling as though the ground beneath me had shifted. The city looked exactly the same. Cars passed, people laughed, coffee shops were full, yet everything felt different. I sat inside my car without starting the engine. One question refused to leave my mind. What if Olivia had been telling the truth? That evening, I finally drove to my parents' house. My mother greeted me with a warm smile. "Emma, you're late." She hugged me. For the first time, the hug felt unfamiliar. Not because she had changed, because I had. Dad walked in carrying a tray of food. "Everything okay at work?" I forced a smile. "Actually, I've been investigating an old missing person case." My father's smile faded for just a second. It was so quick that most people would have missed it. I didn't. During dinner, I watched both of them carefully. every time I mentioned Olivia Brooks. They became quieter. Every time I mentioned St. Anne's Hospital, they looked at each other. Finally, I placed the hospital bracelet on the table. Neither of them touched it. Neither of them spoke. My mother slowly turned pale. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It was inside a police evidence box." The room fell silent. Dad set down his fork. My heart pounded. "I need you both to tell me the truth." "What truth?" my mother asked. "The truth about my birth." Neither of them answered. I looked from one face to the other. Then I quietly asked the question I had never imagined asking. "Am I really your daughter?" My mother covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. Dad closed his eyes for several long seconds. When he finally looked at me, I knew my life was about to change forever. He spoke only 5 words. "There's something we never told you." My father's words echoed through the room. "There's something we never told you." For a long moment, no one spoke. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked louder than ever. My mother wiped away her tears, but they kept coming. I had never seen her look so frightened. Finally, my father took a slow breath. "Emma, before we tell you anything, you need to know one thing." "What?" "We have always loved you." I looked at him without blinking. "I didn't ask whether you loved me. I asked whether you've been telling me the truth." He lowered his head. "No." My mother reached across the table and held my hand. "We never wanted to lie to you." "Then why did you?" She struggled to find the words. "Because we were afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of losing you." I gently pulled my hand away. "I deserve the truth." Dad stood up and walked to the living room. A minute later, he returned carrying an old wooden box. It looked as if it hadn't been opened in years. He placed it on the table. "I hoped you would never have to see this." Inside were old letters, hospital receipts, a faded baby blanket, and a newspaper clipping from 20 years ago. The headline read, "Young mother claims hospital made a terrible mistake." The mother's name? Olivia Brooks. Dad looked at me with tears in his eyes. "The day you were born, the hospital called us. They told us there had been a mix-up involving newborn records. They asked us to wait while they investigated." "What happened?" "They called back 2 days later. They said everything had been resolved. So we believed them." He paused. "But a week later?" "We heard on the news that a young mother named Olivia Brooks had disappeared after insisting her baby had been switched." A chill ran through me. "You knew?" "We knew about the story. But we never imagined," his voice broke, "that it could have anything to do with you." I opened one of the old letters. It wasn't addressed to my parents. It was addressed to the hospital administrator. The sender, Olivia Brooks. The letter read, "I know my daughter is alive. Please stop telling me I'm imagining this. I held her in my arms. I know she's out there." I couldn't read another word. My eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This was a mother's desperate search for her child, and that child might have been me. The next morning, I met Detective Ryan Morales, the officer who had recently reopened the cold case. I showed him everything: the bracelet, the letters, the newspaper clipping. He sat in silence for several minutes. Then he looked up. "Emma, if these documents are genuine, this case is much bigger than a missing person." He explained that years ago, several complaints had been filed against St. Anne's Medical Center. Most were dismissed for lack of evidence. Records had disappeared. Witnesses changed their statements. Employees suddenly resigned. Nothing ever led to charges. "It was as if someone wanted the truth buried," Ryan said. "Together we visited the abandoned home where Olivia had lived before she vanished. The house had been empty for years. Dust covered every room. Most of the furniture was gone, but one bedroom remained almost untouched. On the wall, there were faded pencil marks showing the height of a child. Beside them was a handwritten sentence: 'I'll never stop waiting for you.' I stood there, unable to move. Who had written it? Olivia? Or someone who believed she would come back? Ryan searched a closet and found a small metal box hidden beneath loose floorboards. Inside were photographs, medical papers, and an audio cassette labeled, "For My Daughter." We looked at each other. Neither of us spoke. If that tape still worked, it might answer questions that had remained hidden for 20 years. Ryan carefully placed the cassette into an evidence bag. "We'll have this restored." As we walked out of the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were closer than ever, not just to solving a mystery, but to discovering who I really was, and neither of us noticed that someone was watching us from a parked car across the street. The engine started. The car drove away, leaving behind one question: who was afraid of the truth coming out after all these years? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same three things: the hospital bracelet, Olivia's letter, and the cassette labeled, "For My Daughter." By sunrise, I was already at the police department. Detective Ryan Morales was waiting for me outside the evidence lab. "They restored the tape," he said quietly. My heart started pounding. "Does it still work?" He nodded. "Most of it." The technician placed the old cassette into a player. For a few seconds, nothing but static filled the room. Then, a woman's voice, soft, gentle, tired, but full of love. "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't find you." I covered my mouth. The room disappeared around me. Only her voice remained. "My beautiful little girl, I don't know who took you, but I want you to know I never stopped looking." Tears rolled down my face. Ryan quietly looked away. The recording continued. "If one day you learn the truth, please don't grow up hating anyone. Just live the happy life I always wanted for you." The tape ended. No dramatic music, no shocking confession, just silence. The silence of 20 years. A week later, the DNA results arrived. Ryan placed the sealed envelope on the table. "You don't have to open it here." I looked at him. "I've waited my whole life without knowing it." "I'm opening it now." My hands shook as I unfolded the report. There it was, one sentence, clear, simple, impossible to misunderstand. "Emma Carter is the biological daughter of Olivia Brooks." I closed my eyes. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Everything I believed about my life had changed in a single sentence. The investigation moved quickly after that. The old hospital records were examined again. Former employees were interviewed. A retired nurse finally came forward. She admitted that years earlier, newborn identification records had been altered after a paperwork disaster. Instead of reporting the mistake immediately, several administrators covered it up to protect the hospital from a massive scandal. Olivia had refused to accept their explanation. She kept demanding answers. She kept asking for her daughter. Eventually, people stopped listening. Her disappearance had been treated as a separate mystery. But the truth was much simpler. She had spent years searching under the wrong identity, following false leads until illness forced her to stop. She had passed away several years before the case was reopened. She never got the chance to meet me again. That truth hurt more than anything else. A few days later, Ryan handed me one final envelope. "We found this in Olivia's storage unit." Inside was a birthday card. It wasn't addressed. It had never been mailed. On the front were the words, "To my daughter." Inside she had written, "If fate is kind, we'll meet again. If not, I hope someone tells you that I loved you every single day." I cried harder than I ever had before, not because I had found my biological mother, but because I had found proof that she had never stopped being my mother. That evening, I visited the small cemetery where Olivia was buried. I placed white flowers beside her headstone. For several minutes, I said nothing. Then I smiled through my tears. "Hi, I'm Emma. I finally found you." A gentle breeze moved through the trees. For the first time in weeks, my heart felt calm. When my investigation was published, the story spread across the country. The hospital publicly apologized to the affected families. The remaining records were reopened. Several other families finally received answers they had been seeking for decades. Justice had arrived. Late, but it arrived. People often ask me what the biggest discovery of my career was. They expect me to mention awards or famous investigations. I always give the same answer. The day I went looking for someone else's story and accidentally found my own. My parents, the people who raised me, were terrified that I would leave them. I didn't. They had made mistakes, but they had also loved me every day of my life. Love isn't erased by truth. Sometimes, truth simply makes love more honest. I now carried two families in my heart, the family that raised me, and the mother who never stopped searching for me. If there's one lesson this journey taught me, it's this. Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't hidden in old evidence boxes. They're hidden in the stories we never think to question. And sometimes, the truth doesn't take your family away. It helps you understand how precious it has always been.